Recording in progress.
So for those of you that don't know, welcome. I'm Debbie Lacey, the founder of Eastside For All, and I'm finding that these events on transformative placemaking are attracting some guests outside of our area. So welcome to you, everyone, and thank you again for being here. So Eastside For All works at the hyperlocal systemic levels to impact racial, social, and economic justice in our area. And placemaking is one of the topics that touches on all our priorities and gives us an opportunity to connect many different sectors and many of you in different groups that are in the community. So as we explore place and placemaking today, I want to first acknowledge the first peoples of this place. Our region lies on the unceded and ancestral land of the Coast Salish, the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, and the Suquamish people. We honor and give thanks to the first peoples past, present, and future, and to the land itself. So please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. You can learn more about the Indigenous communities connected to specific geographic regions at the Native Land digital website that I know many of you are very familiar with if you've been to our events and several others that do reference this great resource. So the creators of that site say that their hope is to improve the relationship of people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, with the land around them and with the real history and sacredness of that land. Let us also recognize and acknowledge that acknowledgements such as mine today are not replacements for authentic relationship building and the practice of centering the needs and contributions of our Indigenous communities. Thank you. I also want to say that with everything happening in our community, our nation, and our world right now, we've all become very skilled at the practice of compartmentalizing. I know I have. Doesn't mean that it's easy though. So thank you for choosing to spend some of your time, your energy, and your bandwidth here today on this particular topic. After our guest speaker's presentation, you'll be able to join some small group conversations to share your connections to the topic and your ideas. So I do hope you're able to stay for that part because that's where we can move from ideas to inspired action with one another. As you listen to the presentation, please reflect on the implications for our East King County cities and communities, or your own community if you're calling in from elsewhere. What are the similar needs here and in your community? And what conversations are happening around this topic? What are the conversations that need to happen? So please keep some of that in mind. And at this time, and for those who are able, would you mind turning your cameras on to help me welcome our speaker? It's always good for us all to be able to see each other's faces whenever possible. So those that are able to, that'd be great if you could turn your cameras on to show your beautiful faces as we welcome in Uba Gardheer. Uba is the Equitable Development Division Director in the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development. She currently oversees the Equitable Development Initiative Program, investing in community-based organizations working on anti-displacement strategies and economic development opportunities. Previously, she was a program director at Puget Sound Sage, where she focused on land use policy, affordable housing, equitable transit-oriented development, participatory planning, leadership development, and the importance of racial justice in policy making. I have great appreciation for Uba as a longtime community organizer in King County. I believe you've been here for 25 years, if that's correct. And you've just persistently and boldly called attention to the political and social transformations that are required in the community. So Uba, thank you so much for being here and providing an overview of the equitable development work that you do. Please welcome Uba in, and I'm going to grab your slides, Uba. Come on, thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you everyone for inviting me today. I'm not good at following directions, or sometimes I just follow it in the way I understand. So I have some history of why we are, as a state fighting this uphill battle for equitable development and equity, which in the beginning I'm like, did I do too much? But when the person in the video shared the Leviton history, I was like, yeah, this is timely. So I'll do that quickly and then talk about some current impacts of that history. And then I'll give you a quick overview of the equitable development and also talk a little bit about other initiatives that I am involved in, like communities of opportunity that's doing that type of work. Yeah, again, my name is Ubax Gardheer, and I'm also a mother of 3 children who go to Bellevue School District. And yeah, my connection to the East Side, I lived there for about 8 years. Next. Yes, so I will today discuss the history, the current impacts, and what as a group or different organizations and individuals you you should be doing to combat and work towards a racially just society. Next. Yeah, I like starting with this slide for all of us to just get a shared analysis of how private property laws and zoning were created to establish and maintain systems of racial and economic subordination, specifically for Black and Indigenous people. And concepts of property and race were developed together when we were starting to form as a society here and other places. Next. I am gonna skip this next one, just actively recognizing that we're on the indigenous land. And if you doing any presentations and things like that, you can always go to this site, and wherever you are doing that presentation from, you can find and whose land we on. Next. So how did we get the way we got as a society? We need in 10 minutes to travel back in time to answer this question. Next, this is the timeline of the things that I'm gonna go through, talking about colonization, industrialization, and urbanization, the tale of 2 cities in all the states here. Talk about the white flight and urban sprawl and how it has impacted us, and then growth management and gentrification, which is, the 90s to the present, which we're still living that. And I mean, the timeline doesn't end. I think we're continuing, and I continuously add to this history and timeline. Next. So in Puget Sound region, the white settlers came around 1851. And then 4 years later, the Point Elliott Treaty established the Suquamish, Tuolip, Swinomish, and Lummi Reservation, the greatly restricted land of the Coachella tribes. And this was ratified in 1859. Next. I add this slide because I work in Seattle. So in Seattle, when it was incorporated in 1865, there was an ordinance number 5, that was introduced that prohibited Native people from living in Seattle. And the ordinance, some parts of the ordinance say that be it ordained by the Board of Trustees of the town of Seattle that no Indian or Indians shall be permitted to reside or locate their residence on the street, highway, land, or alley, or any vacant lot in the town of Seattle, from a point known as south side of Charles Plummer's 10-acre lot to a point known as the south side of Bell's land claim. So this came from the ordinance, and I'm quoting directly from the ordinance, and I understand that, and using Indian or Indians or some other words from the quote sometimes is triggering to folks. So just wanted to name that. And as I said, when Seattle was incorporated in 1869, it was named for a chief, after a chief, Chief Selt, who was from the Duwamish and Squamish tribes. Next. this was the period of industrialization and urbanization between the 70s to honestly the 1940s. This is where we see cities as sites of production and wealth, but also poor living conditions. So as you know, between this time period, there was a mass migration of African Americans and the Europeans to the industrial north. Most people were living in crowded tenements with a poor sanitation next to factories, breathing bad air. These problems were addressed by architects, engineers, and social workers at the time. And during this time, planning emerged as a discipline to borrow from these professions and look at the city as a built and social environment. Next. And just to add quickly to the other slide, this is when in this influenced suburban development. And a lot of folks looked at this as a form of social control by rich urban reformers, worried about poverty and violence of quote unquote morally questionable city dwellers. And we still hear this type of rhetoric up to today when we're talking about, for example, our homeless relatives and folks like that. Next. So I am sorry, I was talking about the other slide, but the picture before, the slide before, that is a gentleman that was named William Gross, and he helped create an African-American community in Seattle. A lot of the African-American community were in Central District in Seattle, and he moved here in around 1861 through the way of Canada. And he opened a hotel and a restaurant in Seattle in Yesler Way. And that's how he also bought 10 acres of land. And that's how African Americans ended up in the Central District when they started coming here. Also with the African American, the other things is, even though Washington State did not have the explicitly racist laws of neighboring states like Oregon and Idaho, the opportunities that were offered to them was, little opportunities, manual positions. The important positions was not open to African Americans at the time. And he played a huge role in providing lodging for many of the Seattle's earliest Black residents. And then the next slide now, as you might all know, and this history, a lot of it, the way I set it up is I'm showing what kind of racial or historical inequities a lot of, the different ethnicity and groups that live in Washington State faced. So this is where, as you know, in 1882, Congress, responding to pressure from unions, passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. This treaty with the Chinese government banned Chinese immigrants from entering America and called for the deportation of anyone who arrived after 1880 that was from China. And as you also might know, Chinese immigrants began arriving in America in significant numbers in the 1850s, most of them from the southern provinces of China. They were utilized to build the transcontinental railroads. And at first they were praised as diligent workers, but the praise turned to hostility as the railroad was completed and the competition for other jobs increased. And here you see the anti-Chinese political activity and violence that erupted between 1880 and 1900 throughout the West, including our region. Next. And between the 30s, in our region, we see an increased racialized planning policies like the restrictive covenants, which prohibited, again, African Americans and other people of color in integrating into white neighborhoods. A lot of neighborhoods, especially in Seattle, other suburban areas in like South King County or East Side has another history of how folks got to where they are and what kind of investment that they benefited from. But in Seattle, we see restrictive covenants, which prohibited a lot African Americans or people of color to live in this opportunity-rich neighborhoods. But in some wealthier enclaves and domestic servants were conveniently exempted from this in restriction. Next. This next slide speaks to the Executive Order 9066, the Japanese internment, where over 2,000 people were removed in different cities, including Seattle, to a place called Camp Harmony in Puyallup. And this significantly caused loss of property and community ties. This fairground was the division of about 43 acres into 4 sections, which it has its own laundry, shower areas and all that, but many families found this divided life among themselves difficult, especially immigrants. A lot of times, up to today, define family as different, not just like the domestic mother, father, and children. It was hard for them to see friends and distant families. And also each family was allotted only 50 square feet of space to live in. And the code now states that you can't have anyone living in a space smaller than 70 square feet. We also have seen or continue to see history in places like Bellevue, for example. Recently, the thing that happened in Bellevue College, where they were trying to get rid of some of the history of how, some of the real estate folks acquired land. But that's a presentation for another time. But you should look it up. Next. So here in this period, in the 70s to 40s, again, cities become center for production and wealth generation. And again, planning arises as a tool to manage that growth. Transportation systems expand with extensive rail systems that were later removed when the automobile industry ruined the private market for passenger rail. It becomes very expensive for public entities to operate and maintain, and the rise of the automobile adds too much congestion for streetcars to function. And then this is also the period of suburban development that expands, which has been fueled by white flight from city centers and the urban core, increased car ownership and subsidized infrastructure. Next. This is a history around zoning, and I am using example of Seattle. But for example, in Seattle, the zoning ordinance was not explicitly based on race, but summary documents from its development reveal the same underlying motivations. For example, there's an archival document that reveals the belief that expanding the type of uses and development will lead to lower standards of racial strength and virility. Next. So I'm rushing through this, so bear with me. This is again, and from the archival document that I was talking about, and some of the language I said is coming from there. And implementing zoning laws were the appropriate way to essentially maintain segregation. And then on the other side, I didn't talk about it, but also, the person that shaped the zoning laws in Seattle is the same person that worked on the St. Louis zoning program that, and was kind of used racial underlying to make that zoning laws and things like that. Next. So this is a Great Depression era map from the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and it shows redlining in action. And as you all know, the Homeowners Loan Corporation recruited mortgage lenders, developers, real estate appraisers in nearly 250 cities to create this type of maps that were color-coded based on credit worthiness and risk on neighborhoods. Again, neighborhoods were color-coded based on potential credit risks they pose to homeowners. Green and blue coded as, best and still desirable. And this one, neighborhoods were the kinds of places where white buyers would look to live. And then red, which was color-coded as hazardous, were neighborhoods that were noted because of their high densities of African-American and other people of color demographics, and will therefore be considered discouraging at the time. Again, this is redlining in the most literal sense. Next, I'm going to be rushing through this. We continue to see other disinvestments and racialized federal policies facilitating white families moving out of cities and into the suburbs. For example, the US transportation policy creates huge network of freeways that help suburbs expand. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 paid for much of this interstate highway system throughout the country. In our region, obviously it helped build I-5, I-90, and 405, which again becomes a gateway to the suburban communities. Also, at this time period, the federal government creates new subsidies for home ownership, such as the Federal Housing Administration and the GI Bill. And it's documented between 1934 and 1962, and I think this is nationwide. The federal government backed over $120 billion of home loans, and more than 98% went to white home buyers. And most of the subsidies went to new homes in the suburbs again. Again, looking at it in another way, this advanced racial segregation in the US and in our region, where suburbs was looked as equal to private prejudice and public policies facilitating that. And ghettos were looked at as inner city poverty and government disinvestment happening in those, inner cities. Next. So here it's the era of renewal and removal. Urban renewal continues to further class and race stratification. Neighborhoods of color were declared blighted. It's the era of some clearance, also quote unquote separate but equal, and low income neighborhoods of color were demolished for highway expansion. This had a lot of negative impacts, including displacing families who are relocated to areas with poorly built public housing projects, lack of municipal services and community resources, low performing schools, employment discrimination, and to top it, undervalued land and limited access to bank loans. Next. Yeah, so this, the tale of two cities continue. This is still focused in Seattle. You can just read what's on the slide, and you just want to go to the next slide. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968 protected against discrimination for protected classes. I just want to add that even though this outlawed redlining and other race-based housing discrimination, the impacts have stayed. The red areas, for example, of the map that I showed you earlier are still today's impoverished minority-dominated neighborhoods or BIPOC neighborhood-dominated neighborhoods. And the work that I'm doing at the City of Seattle, which I'm going to talk about later, focuses on those neighborhoods right now. And although legal discrimination has been outlawed, housing and banking is still far from equal. Next. Yeah, and then from the 90s to now, we see the continuation of, how growth management is happening and gentrification. This is also the time that Growth Management Act was adopted in response to the sprawl. This is around the time of the tech boom and bust, the housing bubble, the Great Recession, subprime mortgage crisis is happening. Obviously, we see even an even recovery that's happening, and the Recovery Act was introduced at the time. And wealth disparities greater than ever at that time, and also an increase in discriminatory lending practices affects communities of color. And even as we are talking about this being in the 90s and things like that, right now, as we are recovering from COVID and things like that, we are seeing, as folks are shaping up the recovery policies, programs, and investments to ensure that we are not, recovering in a way that, negatively impacts communities. Next. Yeah, I want to end this part of the history by, bringing your attention to the book called The Color of Law. Actually, this book talks about, all kind of zoning and investments that have happened throughout the United States. Even the Levington story is in this book. And the author says that today's residential segregation is not the unintended consequence of individual choices and of otherwise well-meaning law or regulation, but of unhidden public policy that explicitly segregated every metropolitan area in the United States. So why do I share this history? I think as a group, you've been talking about belonging and othering and things like that. And this history has facilitated the way right now as governments or philanthropy or nonprofit groups, we are showing up. Next is discussion questions. I am going to skip that and go into next. The current impacts of all that history, like, why are you talking to us about all this history? It has impacts that we see today that that actually makes it hard for us to do the work we are set to do to create a more racially equitable society. So I'm quickly going to go through those impacts. Next. So I like starting with, due to this history, we right now currently as a society, we are experiencing the possibility of disaster gentrification. We're talking about climate refugeeism. There's a lot of talk of reparation of what that looks like. And obviously the limits of economic growth on a finite planet is now something that is facing all of us as a society. Next. So the quick current impacts that I'm going to talk about is right here on the slide. Sorry, something just. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about how we live in still segregated cities. Population of living in high poverty areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about disparities in household wealth and income by race, disparities in unemployment, exclusionary zoning, all the history that I talked about. I'm going to show how that's currently impacting us. Next. So this is a map of Seattle. On my left, you see the map that I shared on the current history. And then on my right, you can see, this is from the 2020 census block data. I would love to see what the 2020 looks like. But one dot represents one person, blue being white, green being black, and then orange and red being Asian and Hispanic, and then dark brown being other race. And as you can see, north of the Ship Canal in Seattle is a sea of blue that represents white communities. And then, the south of the Ship Canal represents other. Next. We see the population living in high poverty neighborhoods by race and ethnicity. This one compares Seattle, Washington to Washington State in 2017. Again, you can see that Black communities at 14% in Seattle or 8% in the rest of the state, or looking at even the Asian or Pacific Islanders. I understand that we really need to go deeper into this data to, segregate, to get a desegregated data to tell the story. But yeah, I just wanted to share, looking at 13% of people of color living in high poverty neighborhoods. Next. When we look at homelessness, it disproportionately impacts people of color. Most groups make up a larger share of homeless population. Again, 7 times more likely for Native Americans to be homeless compared to their white counterparts, and 5 times for Black or African American community to be homeless. So again, homelessness disproportionately impacting people of color. Next. Again, neighborhood elementary schools. This again shows, in, for example, the white community living in neighborhoods that have great access to great schools, compared to, for example, the Black communities or English learning and ELL, English language learners, I call it ESL. Then again, you see, in the history, we talked about how the neighborhoods were formed, which ones were invested in and which one were not. And then up to today, we're seeing how that is impacting in even elementary schools. Next. This is disparities in household wealth. If you look at the white alone numbers, in average, the median for all races is about $80,000, 132 for white communities, and then less than $10,000 for Black communities. Again, this is showing in the differences in household wealth. Next. And this one is income by race. Again, I apologize, focusing in Seattle. That's where my head is at. And this shows that white households have the highest median income, and it's more than double that of Black households. Next. We also see disparities in employment. And again, who's unemployed? And this is comparing December 2019 to 2020 after COVID. Again, you see the number of Black men who are unemployed is highest compared to, for example, white men or white women. Next. This actually, I like putting this here because it, again, I talked about how in African Americans started living in Central District, and every 2 decades, displacement starts happening. And then you can see in 2010 how, the whole city, pretty much even the north of the Ship Canal, having a lot of like African American or Black residents. And for example, in the Central District, where most of the African Americans were, in the 60s, I think the population there was over 70%. 2010, it was less than a quarter. And then I'm not sure what the numbers for 2020 is, but folks were saying it might be, less than 20%. Next. The exclusionary zoning impacts, again, you see that, for example, in Seattle and other suburbs, we are zoned as a single family. And, we see, especially in Seattle, that we are running out of land, and also properties becoming more and more expensive. And that is, impacting displacement and gentrification. That was because the way zoning was put in place. Next. Again, suburbanization of poverty contribution, which mostly impacts South King County. And between 2000 and 2015, the number of suburban poor population increased in 90 of the top 97 metros, including our area. And this especially we see a lot in South King County, and now even further to PS County. Next. I'm rushing through this, so like if you have questions, later on, please skip them and then I'll answer that. But I know that I'm rushing through all this. Yeah, the impacts in redlining, for example, that shows up in, the number of people of color that live in, for example, hazardous neighborhoods still right now is over 52%. The number of contaminated sites or per square foot is more in areas that were in color-coded as hazardous or red. And also life expectancy in these communities also vary. I think in Seattle, the numbers might not be a lot different because, again, a lot of the communities that we are comparing each other to have already been displaced. But for example, looking at Seattle, life expectancy in South Park is 74, 13 years less than wealthy, mostly white neighborhoods like Magnolia. There's another one, another data that was comparing, not Newcastle, but urban to, there's the other rich neighborhood by Bellevue. And that was also over 10-year difference for as far as life expectancy is concerned. And then even looking at income, there was just a huge difference. Next. I mean, we are just getting out of COVID, and we could see that COVID impacts also housing insecurity. This shows 18% of people of color and mortgage holders missed or deferred their June 2020 payment. These numbers might have changed for 2021. And then also we could see that renters even more impacted, where over 34% missed their or deferred their June payment. Next, still on current impacts. This is some breakout questions. Let's go to the next thing. So now I'm going to talk about, and this is where I talk about the work I'm doing. I'm going to talk about the Equitable Development Initiative and how this program was formed to undo some of the history and current impacts that I've talked about, mostly focusing on Seattle, but also talk a little bit about communities of opportunity, which is countywide. Next. So the Equitable Development Initiative was born out of an inside-outside strategy, community advocates working with internal city folks to really talk about how displacement and development and lack of opportunity is impacting their communities. This coalition called South Communities Organizing for Racial and Regional Equity and the Race and Social Equity Task Force partnered on pressuring government to do something about the impacts, displacement or access to opportunity that they were seeing in their neighborhoods. Next. So these maps that were produced in 2016. So the city of Seattle did not only do an environmental impact statement, but did an equity analysis, which showed the displacement risk index and the access to opportunity index. In the displacement, they looked at things like vulnerability, including housing cost burden, rental tenancy. They looked at amenities, proximity to frequent bus services, regional job center, core businesses, and civic infrastructure, and then also development capacity and rent. And then the opportunity index focused on things like education, economic opportunity, transit access, again, health, and things like that. And this is the map that we use for the Equitable Development Initiative to where we are doing our investments and programming in Seattle. I think PCRC just finished something similar. So, and just looking that up and seeing how it's impacting your neighborhoods and things like that might be a place to start. Next. So the Equitable Development Framework has the dual purpose of mitigating displacement and increasing access to opportunity for Seattle's most marginalized communities. And we have investments that we give to community, which includes capacity building and also project development, real estate project development. And all of our grantees, currently we are supporting over real 25. We had COVID in grantees that we supported in 2020, but as of, I think, as of this month, we are probably going to be supporting over 45 projects, and all of our projects will have to bring at least 3 of these equity drivers, looking at advancing economic mobility and opportunity, preventing displacement. But a lot of times when we talk about displacement, we focus only residential displacement, but also preventing the residential, commercial, and cultural displacement. So I talked a lot about, for example, Central District, folks being displaced, but their cultural anchors, their churches, their barbershop, all the cultural anchors that they put in place in order to thrive in that neighborhood is still there. So what can we do and how can we work with them to make sure that they are benefiting from that? And then also a lot of times we look at things from a deficit-based, but making sure that we're building on the local cultural assets of those communities, looking at transportation and promoting transportation, mobility, and connectivity, especially as it relates to transit-dependent families, developing healthy and safe neighborhoods, and then finally providing equitable access to all neighborhoods. I talked about cities being segregated, so how are we making sure that we're working with other departments and other other regions to ensure that low-income communities in, for example, low access to opportunity areas can get access to opportunity-rich neighborhoods like in North Seattle, or for example, Bellevue and things like that, and not just focus again on the residential piece, but how do we set up these families in a way that they're able to get everything that they need from that neighborhood. Next. So the other one that I want to talk about is the communities of opportunity, which 10% of the Best Start for Kids initiative goes to communities of opportunity, partnership between Seattle Foundation and King County, and working on creating greater health, social, economic, and racial equity in King County, so everybody thrives and prospers regardless of race or place. Again, this initiative focuses on 4 things: housing affordability, health equity, economic development, and community connections. And they also focus on, quote unquote neighborhoods that, what they call distressed zip codes. I don't like that word. They need to find something else, but growing network of residents, communities, organizations, and funders who have the goal to create a healthy, thriving community that is centered in racial justice. Their different funding buckets includes place-based investment strategies. It includes learning communities, and then policy and systems change, which is really big because, as I talked about, the systems that were put in place is still impacting communities. So how are we investing in community groups to work with government and other folks to really change these policies and systems to something that really benefits everyone, regardless of race and socioeconomic background? Next, I think I'm done. I hope so. Yep. So I will open up.
Thank you, Uba. I know that was a whirlwind, and one of the things that I so appreciate, though, about what you shared, and that you started with the history, and I know you were apologizing about having that be Seattle specific, but that is the request here, because I think it's important for us as communities in different cities to see how the history plays into current context and challenges, wherein then you developed investments and policies and priorities to address that. So we can definitely do our own versions of that as far as linking everything up. But I think it was super important that you shared the context for how and why the city has the programs that they currently have and the priorities. And I also want to name that, you have those resources, the staff resources to track and compile data that reflects those priorities, right? So I just want to open it up to some questions here for Uba about her work and her presentation. So I'm going to hop into the chat here and also ask Heather, and I just want to shout out to Heather McKnight, always my right-hand person in a lot of these online events. Really appreciate your support. So Heather, if you saw anything of note in the chat for questions, please let me know. And I'll take a look here and see if anyone has. And you can also raise your hand virtually or otherwise. And I have you in gallery view, everybody, so I can see if anybody has a question.
Debbie, there have been no questions posted in the chat.
Okay. Our Friday energy can be low and it's a lot to take in. Uba, one of the questions that I have when we think about, a lot of times what we hear and what we know is the reality is that our individual cities in East King County and other parts of King County, South and North, struggle with not being as large, obviously, and having the budgets that the city of Seattle has. So are there recommendations that you would say would be good places to start for cities that don't have those kind of resources right now, but they clearly are having conversations about trying to prioritize equity issues in development and placemaking? Do you have some thoughts about what can help us and what we as advocates can call upon our cities to do realistically as next steps?
Yes, I think for starters, advocacy, community organizing, and leadership development is really important. EDI was born because there was an organized community that knew, what their communities need and use that to pressure government to do something about it. So investing in leadership development in those neighborhoods is a start. The second piece is what the communities of opportunity is doing around, partnering with philanthropy to really partner on the other stuff about place-based strategies, learning communities, all that is great. But I've seen most of the impact comes from the policy and systems change work that's happening. So I think in figuring out a way to partner with philanthropy to, again, invest in policy and systems change. And then I'm part of the board of Arch, is it affordable regional housing something? I'm not being a good ambassador right now, but yes. But that group, for example, really focuses on around housing and ownership, home ownership and housing affordability, and work across different east side cities, pooling their resources to meet those needs, right? So how do you, like, one city or one organization cannot do the type of work that you're setting up to do systemic change, investments, and things like that? So how do you partner with even unusual suspects and even business? How do you bring business to the table, convince them that this is really good for their bottom line, business bottom line, and doesn't make sense for folks to be coming all the way from South King County to, for example, work in Kirkland, or and then being on the road an hour, 90 minutes, going back to South King County or Pierce County. So how do you bring all those unusual suspects together and share analysis and goals that will benefit everybody, that business, that nonprofit, those residents, the city at large?
Thank you for talking about all of those pieces that are certainly doable entry points, I think, for all communities. It was especially paying attention to what you were saying about philanthropy and the role that philanthropy can play. Alaric, I see you have your hand open. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Uba, so much for your presentation. That was great. And I, as a Bellevue East Sider with kids in Bellevue schools, I think that the situation here on the East Side is really different from Seattle. And I think that a lot of times we have a little difficulty translating, you know, that history of redlining and all of that to our community here. We did have redlining, you know, one of the few, I know a few examples in Clyde Hill, you know, they couldn't sell to Japanese and other Mongolian races or something weird like that until 1955. I mean, you know, it wasn't that long ago. But, you know, right now we are one of those, I guess the green line areas, similar to Laurelhurst and Magnolia, where we've got the good schools, we've got the affluent, you know, residents, and I'm very fortunate to be able to live here and have had my kids go through the Bellevue School District and actually graduate, which is wonderful. But so how do we deal with people who don't understand the whole history of, you know, the racial discrimination and want to keep the folks from South County, you know, and Seattle, oh my gosh, you know, they're really scary, from coming over the bridge because they're like scary people, even though they're the people who work in our restaurants and, you know, are the baristas, and, you know, some of our teachers and a lot of our social workers can't afford to live here on the East Side. How do we change that community perception and change the conversation?
I think, again, going back to getting a shared analysis, because a lot of folks don't know this history. You know, in last year during the racial reckoning, there's just a lot organizing that happened through the schools. My kids also go to Bellevue School District, like I said earlier, but couldn't afford to live in Bellevue. So I bought a home about 1.5 years ago in Renton, but they go to a choice school. So this year will be great working in Seattle, living in Renton, and taking kids to 3 different schools, elementary and middle. And yeah, so I think like showing folks how, you know, even that impacts, you know, because a lot of times folks have this kind of like view of like, it's not my problem. It's like you said, scary Seattle homelessness problem, or, you know, and this working class folks who, you know, are not really contributing to our residents or society, but they are. Like I said earlier, like really, how do you bring business to the table to say this is helpful for you, your bottom line? You know what I mean? You don't even have to like go overseas to bring talent. Invest in your own, you know, in your own region. How do you change that perspective? And then how do you make it like, for like a lot of business will not get into business with you if they don't see any benefits. So how do you really frame that in a way that they see where they can benefit? So shared history in kind of shared understanding of, you know, what kind of benefits, how this benefits you. Because I talked about the communities of opportunity, which is countywide initiative, but the investments and focuses on this low-income communities and things like that. And when we were coming together to pull together and the where the investments is going to happen, just pulling together the whole program and things like that. A lot of like folks who, for example, were representing the Sound cities, you know, would be like, where's our cut? You know, even right now, the ballot is being voted on. It's on the November ballot, the Best Start for Kids ballot. Even now, when we look at our King County representatives and things like that, they're all like, okay, what is my constituencies getting from this? They're being taxed, but most of the investment is going to these neighborhoods. So really being able to talk to them through that. And then also the benefit of, you know, these are racialized, like you said, and disparities and things like that, just like, you know, talking about racial equity or even equity in a way that folks can see that it benefits them, but it's going to take a while, right? I talked about how Seattle was organized and the community knew what they wanted, but that was South Seattle. Right now, we're working with groups in Lake City and Northgate that don't even have organizations that represent or are by these communities, and we're working on building capacity for them. So it's going to take time. investments and doing a lot of what we have learned in school in other places, but I think it's doable. And how do you also, this tipping point policies and investments, how do you use that to really, you know, because we have a tendency as a society, something happens, you know, we scream, yell, advocate, organize for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, and then we totally forget and we are in the places where we are in. And then the schools, how do we teach these things to the future leaders of this region from the beginning?
Thank you, Uba. And yes, you're talking about something that we're very familiar with here too, with regards to just challenges in organizing and supporting particularly immigrant and BIPOC-led initiatives that really can connect with communities, help them understand and know about the dynamics impacting them, and then give them opportunities and pathways to share their experiences and their solutions with our local elected officials and other decision makers. So you know, that kind of segues into a quick question here. Well, it's not quick, but I appreciate it from Ellen. Are there communities on the East Side that have adopted policies that you would endorse as first steps in regards to equitable development? And she's naming that bolstering areas that have been redlined as opposed to those that have been historically greenlined may require, and do of course require, different policy. Any thoughts on that, Uba? I'm not aware of particular policies that really have been built with the intention of equitable development and shifting inequitable dynamics around that in East King County. But if others have information about that, please let us know too. What do you think, Uba?
Yeah, I'm not aware of, I think the school districts have started putting some equity policies, and I'm talking about, I'm more familiar with Bellevue School District, but yeah, I know that there is by some BIPOC-led groups that are coming out on the East Side and getting organized and things like that. So what would it look like to really invest in those groups is what I think about. Yeah, I can't think about any example in the East Side right now that, I mean, actually starting to talk about more focusing on the affordable housing ownership, which is, you know, even though there's not a lot of wealth building opportunities in those programs, because you're supposed to sell it back at an affordable rate. But, you know, how do you bolster that? Because I feel like, you know, ownership, home ownership specifically, is one way to really build wealth and to ensure people are anchored in place.
I'd actually like to end your time with us, Uba, with Wade's question, because I'm curious about your answer. So Wade says, equitable has many definitions these days. I understand equal access. What's the difference, and how do these manifest in your community?
For me, actually, equitable definition has to include race, because as I talked to you about, and it has to lead to racial equity outcomes. So it's a process and an outcome too. And I agree. I always have headache about how people use equitable. Sometimes they're talking about parity, and then they say it's not equitable. The areas in South King County is getting funding, and North King County is not, right? So I think getting a shared equitable, it's an definition of what equitable is important. But for me, it's, you know, processes and outcomes that lead to everybody benefiting regardless of race or socioeconomic background. And it's not a basic question. A lot of people ask and redefine that. I have another direct message question, and it says, do you think that equal pay for equal work needs to precede any effort for equal housing, education, equal health, etc.? How to get there? And for me, again, I just go back to wealth building. And I mean, if you are getting equal pay, as you saw in the history I shared, the wealth disparities and the income disparities was different. So like, even if you're getting equal pay, you might not have any other wealth building or a saving account or whatever. You're still like doing that paycheck to paycheck. So you have to think about the big picture of like, how do we build wealth in those communities? And yes, we have to think about housing, education, health, and all that as one thing. A lot of times we just think about economic development, even the way even city of Seattle is structured. There's the Office of Economic Development, there's Office of Housing, you know, there's all these different offices that are doing their thing on their own in siloed. But my department was created to really lead collaborative planning and programming, and looking at those different equity drivers that I shared in all of them together. Like, you have to like move the needle in all those different equity drivers in order to lead to transformative and change. Otherwise, it's just going to be this transactional thing that we keep doing and hoping for change. And that was from Sigrid. Good question.
Well, clearly, we'll have to have you back another time, Uba, because there's just, you've really opened up some great questions and thinking. And I really do encourage people to follow up as far as what the Seattle Initiative is doing. And we can continue to bring some of their examples here as we go in deeper into our conversations in our communities. And those of you that are from other parts too, please do the same. Sometimes it just begins with raising some models from elsewhere and asking about what's possible in our own communities, and who are the people that we need to involve in those conversations so that we can get from wherever we are now to a place where we're integrating some more of these concepts and actions in our day-to-day work and decisions that are made. So Uba, many thanks to you. You're welcome to stay and join our small groups, but if you do have to go, we completely understand. Thank you so much.
Having me. I will go. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Thank you. You too. We are so fortunate in our community to have some real, strong local experts and who come from communities who are being impacted, who know their communities well, and the historical trends that have really contributed to all these things that we're seeing here. So again, much appreciation to Uba. So I know that it can be difficult to hang on in a conversation like this for some small group connecting, but we really do value it highly, because when we talk about placemaking, it doesn't happen at the design stage. It doesn't happen at the policy stage. And initially, it happens in the relationships that we have with one another. So I would love the opportunity to put you into some small groups. And I just want to briefly share a little bit about what we hope to foster and how you all can help with this. Because I know I look around the room and I see folks who have been here with us on this journey, and can't get my slides to advance. There we go. And so we really appreciate everything that you're doing to kind of help elevate the narrative into these places and to share information with your colleagues and friends too. So we like to talk about being in a community of practice with one another, where, in a community of practice, no one is an expert over another person, that we all have valuable contributions to make to the conversation. We all each, of course, bring our unique expertise and wisdom, but when it comes to the work that we're doing together, it is so complex that no one has all the answers. So how do we help each other solve problems? How do we listen to each other's stories? And how do we enter into the practice of challenging ourselves to make improvements and to be more innovative when it comes to racial equity and really addressing some of the disparities that we see here and that are growing every day? So forming new strategic partnerships is really something that can help us, and we can do that in small groups when we make these connections. So as we get ready to do that, I just want to give you a little bit of instruction here. It's very open, wanting you to introduce yourself and take a little time, a minute or so, to share some topics or ideas related to placemaking and development that you're interested in exploring with others. And the point is that you're listening for resonance, not necessarily similarity. So I would give us all the challenge to listen to someone who may have different ideas or be in a totally different sector, for example, and think about what it might be like to have a follow-up conversation with them. So if you choose to accept the challenge, I really would love for you to try to find at least one person and get their contact information, of course, with their permission, so that you can meet with them, maybe have a phone call or a chat, some online or elsewhere that you're comfortable with over the next month. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to pop you into groups for just about 10 minutes or so. It's not going to be a lengthy conversation, but it's meant to get you all connected and get to know a little bit about what you're thinking with regards to placemaking. And so we're just going to do 2 groups because we're a smaller group today here at the end, nearing the end of August on a Friday afternoon. So again, appreciate you all being here. I'm going to stop our recording for now.